Welcome to our latest Mitchell Talks production, as they say. As I will try to say it. We're glad you're with us. This is Newswatch Oklahoma. For those folks who have watched Health Watch Oklahoma on Monday night, this is our latest attempt to try to get a deep dive, or I like to call it a nerd dive, into things that are really important to people. So this is our debut of Newswatch Oklahoma, and I got to tell you, I've got a great co-host tonight that I want to introduce you to, Augusta Mcdonald, reporter over at News 9, who people have seen her work. The most polite television reporter I've ever seen. Augusta, welcome, by the way, to the program.
Scott, thank you. I am very excited to be here. I think this show is a great idea. I think it's a necessary show. And I hope that, your analysis and the guests that you have on the show just bring a depth of insight for Oklahomans who are really interested in their current, civic affairs and public affairs. And there's going to be lots of great questions and great conversations. So I'm very happy to be joining you.
It's very nice. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll see how this goes. We have some good topics tonight. We're going to be talking about some issues with parents, the National School Board Association. We talked about that last weekend on News 9 on Your Vote Counts, which was with Leader Eccles and Jason Dunnington. And, we have a minute to cover those topics. And so we're going to get into that in just a moment with Parent and Voice Edmund Liz Miller. She'll be our first guest in just a moment. Also, there's been some really interesting things happen that have been relatively uncovered in terms of discussions about what's happening at the Oklahoma County Detention Center, which used to be called the Oklahoma County Jail. And you've heard the stories, you've seen the stories, the bullhorns, the leaks, all of the things that happened down there. Very quietly, there have been some improvements, and there are some developments we want to talk about tonight that have been fairly quiet. The third guest we're going to have tonight is on tape, Congressman Frank Lucas. You may remember a few weeks ago, the congressman said, Frank Lucas, that, hey, I've been vaccinated and I want everybody to get vaccinated. He's a very conservative Republican in a very red district, but he kind of swam upstream on some conventional wisdom and has a lot to say. Also, a little hint as to what might be going on tonight in Washington. Finally, we'll segue from the vaccine discussion. One of our familiar faces from Monday night, Dr. Dwight Sublett, who's the president of the Oklahoma chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And you may have noticed yesterday, the FDA greenlit 5 to 11-year-olds for vaccines. So, and is that controversial or what? It absolutely is. So great to have this tonight. Hope you enjoy it. Our first guest is Liz Miller, Parent and Voice Edmund. Liz, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So, Augusta, I told this to Liz when we first met earlier this evening. Could Liz and Cassie Hyder be twins?
Yes, you've got those beachy blonde waves. Yes, you could be twins.
I mean, when I met for the first time, I'm like, she seems very familiar.
Yes.
So,
I'll take that compliment. Thank you.
Yes.
That's great. That's great. Well, thanks for joining us. And I think that we did spend some time on this last Sunday, as I was just telling Augusta. But Liz, tell us exactly what has happened that has riled up Oklahoma parents, especially folks at Parent Voice Edmund. You're a choice organizations, my understanding, and you're really upset about what has been said about you. And by the way, we'll reach out to folks that when we have these discussions, we'll make sure the other side is represented at some point. But tonight, Liz, we've heard of the story. Help us understand more about what's going on.
Well, in a nutshell, the National School Boards Association has labeled activist parents as a domestic terror threat and likened us to hate crimes and these really terrible organizations. They issued a letter on September 29th, which was later discovered was actually in collaboration with the White House. They wrote a letter to President Joe Biden requesting help from the federal government against activist parents who they said pose a threat to school board members and to the safety. Since that time, Attorney General Merrick Garland has actually involved the Department of Justice and the FBI to investigate these parents who are speaking out against things that are happening in schools and are sharing information, going to school boards, and speaking about what they're unhappy about. And now they're investigating these parents as if they're a terror threat. As of today, 22 states have come out and rebuked this letter and the language and the attack on parents and freedom of speech. But unfortunately, we're still waiting for the Oklahoma School Board Association to follow suit. And really just to realize that parents advocating for their kids are not a threat, and that we want to collaborate and we want to have a seat at the table. And so Parent Voice Oklahoma is a collaboration of parents, just volunteers that over the last 2 years have become really engaged and have understood the importance of a parent voice in education. And we're asking the Oklahoma State School Board Association to rebuke this and maybe distance themselves from the National School Board Association. But further than that, we're asking them to partner with parents and not see us as a threat, and to listen to us and actively engage and let us have a seat at the table when it comes to important decisions on our kids' education.
And do you feel that any of the threats, any of the type of threats that letter kind of talked about, you know, I think they essentially offered to provide intelligence in case there were kind of extreme threats to members of a school board or a school district. And I called around after that letter came out to some of the big metro area schools, including Edmond, and I never, no school district had a substantial report of a threat that they were concerned about at the time that they were actively, on guard for. However, in the past couple of years, it is true that there's been a lot more parental involvement at school board meetings, which can look like protests, which can look like, people who are emotional and upset about issues affecting their children. I guess what's the main takeaway, I guess, for you that you want people to know about your parent group and your activism in schools that you feel is misrepresented in the community?
I think it's misrepresented to say that we're not for public education, or that we're not for teachers, or that we are actively fighting against these school boards. We want to partner with them. We want to have a seat at the table. Who better to advocate for what is best for a student than a parent? Parents are their children's best teacher, and they can advocate for what is working for them and what isn't. I think that at the heart of all of this this supposed threat is at most a lack of decorum, because parents are getting frustrated when they go to school board meetings and they want to speak, and they're either told that they can't speak, or we have parents and students whose mics are cut off. I think that if it was a collaborative effort where school boards were willing to listen to parents and meet with them and respond to emails and see the importance of parents acting on behalf of their students, I think that we would see a win in public education. I don't see how that could be seen as negative for parents to offer insight and to try to speak up.
So are you suggesting, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you suggesting almost a different structure in school boards to where parental involvement is a little bit more like organic, or a little bit more organic to the process of policymaking on school boards?
With school boards, with legislation in general, parents need a seat at the table. And there's a reason why Oklahoma is ranked low in education in so many areas. And I think that we've had policies in place for a long time that aren't working. And we have the bureaucrats that are actively working against any legislation that is for, or any policy that is for parent involvement, school choice, etc. And I think that the more parent involvement we have and the more parent input we have to advocate for their students, the better public schools will be.
Liz, are you suggesting that you may be looking at some things legislatively, some fixes, or some things that you want to get done this coming session?
Me personally, I mean, I can say yes, absolutely. I think that we have to put things in place, but from a larger issue, whether it looks like policies or whether it's just relationship building, parents need to be active within school boards, and they need to be active within the choices that are made on behalf of their children. I think that if parents and the public at large have learned anything over the last 2 years, it's how important school boards are at making choices and decisions that impact your children in their education, in their mental well-being, and their health. And parents are being ignored and not allowed to give any input. So if it looks like legislation that is pro-school choice, that gives parents a way out if their children are not thriving in an environment, then I think that children would win. And ultimately, I would like to think that school board members, teachers unions, parents, we all want what's best for students. We want students to thrive. We want Oklahoma to be #1 in education. And I think that if we can collaborate, we can achieve that.
If you had been the head of the school board associations, Dr. Sean Heim here in Oklahoma, if you had a moment to speak, I don't know if you got a chance to talk to Dr. Heim, but if you had one-on-one with him, what would your message be?
Dr. Heim, parents are not your enemy. And by not issuing a rebuke to the NSBA, you have shown that you're supporting their letter and this rhetoric that parents are to be likened to domestic terrorists. We want to partner with you. We want a seat at the table. And we want to make public education in Oklahoma great. Please support us and join these 22 other states that have declared that this letter and this rhetoric is not okay.
Liz Miller, thanks very much. We'll reach out to Dr. Heim. We'll get that message to him and see. We'll ask him to come on very soon, and we'll see what we can do about maybe get you two guys together. It'd be an interesting conversation.
Very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Liz, Scott and Augusta.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz.
With us. All right. So, Augusta, your thoughts there about that conversation?
You know, I think it's interesting. I guess when I read the letter, it was very broad, and it didn't like there are. I looked up instances of violence or like really extreme threats to like school board members, just kind of generally, just did a general search, and there are states where school board meetings have become violent, and there have been death threats to school boards. There's obviously some very hot button issues. And some culture wars that are being played out in public schools. And so, you know, I guess I was a little, I made sure to call around to all of the school districts that I kind of have a working relationship with, just to see, like, have you gotten these threats? Is this an active issue with schools here in Oklahoma? And, you know, the resources to do investigation into possible threats to schools are offered. Whether or not any school in Oklahoma needs to take advantage of them is unclear to me right now, but it wasn't indicated by anybody that I spoke to.
It's going to be an interesting topic, and
yes,
and I think we're going to see some legislation about that. And we've seen these school board meetings around the country, like bullhorns and things like that, which is a perfect way to segue into our next guest.
Yes,
Commissioner Brian Maughan, how are you this evening?
I'm doing good.
You can move a little bit to your right, the other right. There we go. So when we squeeze down the screen, it doesn't always wind up
smack in the middle.
Oh, you heard what I said, but it's just I was trying to be clever, which is like a bad dad joke. So
it's a hit and miss.
We've seen a lot of the jail trusts. We've seen the bullhorns and the protests down at the commission meetings and the jail trust meetings. Can you start with telling us, all right, so the difference between the county commissioners and the jail trust, there's a commissioner on the jail trust. Can you set up, like, tell us where the jail trust came from, what they're responsible for, sort of the run, pitch, catch type of explanation about what we look at when we hear about the jail trust?
Yeah, I'm the one who called for it first a couple of years before we actually finally got it created. And it's by statute a 9-member volunteer citizen. 7 members are volunteers. One is the sheriff and the other is a county commissioner, which happens to be Kevin Calvey. And those 9 members will oversee the transparency and the overall management of the jail, which they do through an administrator, much like city council runs with the city manager, basically doing the day-to-day operations. But at least they can go in at any time they want to and have any kind of inquiry answered at their demand, which is better than just one person being in charge. And I often say, even if it was my own mother, I wouldn't just have one person being in charge of that overall operation. There's way too much of an opportunity for things to not be brought to light. And it's also interesting to have multiple perspectives because they're able to see things from different vantage points, which I think the trust has really done. And as you and I have talked recently, I had a recent opportunity to tour the jail, and I'll be happy to talk about that if you want to, but I've seen many improvements.
All right. So since you brought that up, let me play a clip of your comments. What is that, a couple of weeks ago when this clip was made? I saw absolutely, well, I should say, I saw very little coverage about this. So here's an excerpt of what you said that day.
I went through and saw a number of the different improvements. I think we went to 6 of the 13 floors. Saw a female pod and a male pod and medical, of course, in the basement and the laundry and the kitchen. But I started working for the commissioners in the year 2000, and so this is my 21st year of a frame of reference to the building. And because that was part of my job back then, was to go see the jail for following up on any constituent concerns. And I wanted to say that this was the best tour I've had since I've been there. So for the trust, if you would please convey my thanks to them for the things that I saw that were done. I was so impressed that I called Mr. Prater after I got back and said, I know you're coming up with this investigation, and I asked him if he would please accept an invitation to go on a tour with me, because I'd like to show him the stuff. I mean, to me, before you get ready to consider questioning that stuff, it'd be nice to see firsthand, because I think it's hard to, even for me to describe in this report, all the number of improvements that have been made without visibly seeing it. And I'm talking about crawling in some of the places where the plumbing goes, looking at some of the return air vents. So Del Fry, on your team has done an excellent job, it seems to me. We can report that the hot water seems to be really going all the way to the top floor, maybe for the first time ever, sadly, reliably anyway. The water pressure is good. They've addressed the issues about how you can't double flush the toilet so many times within a period of time so that the sock bombs aren't flooding the place. And, regardless of however many problems there might be with regards to the design of the building, it has to help with the employee situation and the morale of the building if they don't have to sift through a river of fecal matter to get to their duty post. And I mean, that is important. That's biohazards. That's real serious stuff, especially in the world of COVID. And they have addressed that, I like to point out, in the midst of a pandemic, which I think is incredible, because there were so many problems with that being a hot spot for COVID. And then there were also a number of issues with just the transition and taking over. And as they're working through all of those issues, then they're also coming in here and doing some of these infrastructure things, which going back 21 years ago was just maddening to me about why we couldn't fix maybe a broken shower head, for instance. And so those things have been done. There were a couple of things that I thought could have been better, as I'm sure that would be the case if you came out and saw my road crew on any one given day, taking maybe an unfair one-moment snapshot. But that's all we get to do with these tours. And what I was impressed with about those is they had an answer. And there was a plan, and one of which they said there's a 90-day plan that we're intending to bring back to the trust and implement. and we're working through the details. They had already cited vendors that possibly offered solutions to those problems. They had already talked about what the costs were. So I know for a fact they were not just sitting there giving me a cliche answer of, oh yeah, we're working on that.
You kind of know those cliches answer with your experience over the years, right? So
yeah, and I appreciate you playing that, because I couldn't have said it better myself. So thanks for giving all of that sequence of those remarks. You know, we have had so many things that have been monitored by the Department of Justice, and they have given credit when they've come in recently and recognized some of those things. But like you mentioned, it's so difficult to get it out into the public mainstream. So I really appreciate you and Augusta giving me a chance to kind of explain that and highlight, because I think that these volunteers deserve so much credit because they're serving with zero compensation to make this better for our whole community.
Augusta?
You know, I think it's interesting that you've developed, you've got kind of a plan to move forward, and you're trying to kind of restore trust with critics of the jail. I guess what do you hope the community understands about the work you're doing and the type of conditions that you're trying to restore for prisoners in the jail?
Well, not only for the prisoners, but for the clergy who go in, and obviously the staff who work there on a daily basis, and even those who come and visit their loved ones. You know, it's everybody, including vendors. It's for those that transport our inmates to other law enforcement agencies. We have to work and worry about the safety of everybody that's involved there. And the infrastructure of the facility had really disintegrated quite a bit. The way it worked under the sheriff operation is they had the daily maintenance and operation. When the commissioners were in charge then, it was just more or less of the brick and mortar building exterior, which is in relatively good shape. We've had it tested even after the earthquakes. It's a very sturdy structure. But a lot of the stuff inside, like plumbing, the locks malfunctioning on the doors for the jail cells and things like that, were really maintained by the sheriff. So getting in with the trust allows for this to bring in an engineering team, which I mentioned by the name of Del Fries, our engineer that's led that effort. And so fixing some of these things, but there were things like the air vent maybe hadn't been changed in years, if ever. I mean, it was so clogged up that the engineers who came in and studied it were absolutely amazed that the building had not burned down. Well, that obviously affected ventilation. You got issues with the plumbing that you heard me talk about there in the meetings. And so if you can't get water to different places, it affects sanitary issues. It affects the quality of the bath and the way to treat people with the inmate medical, which is on the very top floor. So all these things make it so much more incredibly difficult for people to work and function there. And those are sometimes the subject of lawsuits, which the taxpayers are having to pay. And then on the other side, there's an actual expense. So one of the highlights that I think the Jail Trust deserves a huge amount of credit for is they've taken the water bill down 84%. We were spending about $63,000 a month on the water bill, and it's now about $8,000. That put us in the top 5 consumers of water throughout the city, ahead of most of the area golf courses around here, which I think is just staggering. But if they had that many leaky pipes or shower heads and things like that, it eventually catches up.
Is it frustrating that, I mean, I don't know how many people covered that. I mean, I don't think that you were like, I'm going to make a big statement at the commissioners meeting. But, you know, there's a lot more, the visuals of bullhorns and protests is a little more attractive, right, in terms of the day-to-day news. Not criticism, it just is, all right? So you've made these improvements. Is it frustrating that, to dovetail into what Augusta's question was a while ago, that the message doesn't really seem to get out?
Well, it is, and I understand that pipes and infrastructure stuff is not sexy, and there were people that were criticizing what we did get some coverage over during that time, more money for the jail and put more money in the jail. Even if we have a plan to build a new jail or an annex or a satellite facility, the collection of those funds and the construction of it would be a 2 to 5 year. That's a optimistic outlook on constructing something that would be ultimately inhabitable. So you have to fix the toilets now. You can't wait 5 years to be able to successfully flush all the toilets in a 1,200 bed facility jail, which has been routinely expected in years past to hold double that capacity. So, you know, some of these things just have to be dealt with. And that was the frustration to me, is that we couldn't at least get that vantage point out for the public to understand, because no one, you know, when you talk to them about letting commodes sit unflushed for any length of time, thinks that's a good idea, of course. But getting them to understand that that translates into, yes, we're going to have to spend a little bit more money on this facility now.
Thank you, Scott.
Go ahead.
You know, I think it might be helpful for you to just like reflect for a second on why it's so critical for a community to have a healthy functioning jail, and to justify the expense of ensuring that repairs are made quickly and the people inside, for whatever reason they're there, are safe and well cared for.
Well, number one, the taxpayers ultimately pick up the bill. And by that, it's usually the property taxpayers in Oklahoma. That's the state law. So if you get a judgment against you or an injunction against you, then that liability faces against the property owners, and it, by federal law, has to be paid off within 3 years. So you see a 33 1/3 increase to whatever that judgment is on each individual property tax roll. So I take that very seriously. The other thing is just for the day-to-day well-being, and of course just caring about every individual that's in there, even those that are guilty from a humane standpoint, but certainly also the clergy and the staff and those that are visiting their loved ones in there. And you have to overall provide that safe environment. But constitutionally in Oklahoma, we are required to have a jail in every single county. It doesn't allow us to do, you know, a group of 5 counties get together and have regional jails or something that would be more efficient. And that would take a constitutional change to make that happen. And so therefore, we're saddled with this. And in Oklahoma County, having the largest population, we naturally have the largest population of inmates. And so it's a little bit more high profile here than it is in the other 76 counties across the state. And that's why it is so often on the forefront of the news here in Oklahoma County.
Let me ask one final question, and we thank you for your time tonight. Something that was kind of slipped by me there when I first heard this, which was you've invited the district attorney, who is trying to convene or is convening a grand jury over the jail trust, to tour this. And my understanding was that he said yes. Can you give us a little background on that? And what is the importance or implication that district attorney is going to go take that tour with you?
Well, DA David Prater and I are friends, but we disagree about this trust. And I had said when they were bringing forward a grand jury to investigate different things that have happened, and we're not in denial. Some things have happened. Things happen in jails all the time. I don't know why a grand jury now versus when things have happened over since my course of being commissioner, with lots of things when the sheriff was running the jail. Never was suggested we bring in a grand jury then. But nevertheless, I just said, if you're going to come in and do that, I would like to invite you personally to assist a tour with me, where I can personally point out the changes that I've seen back with my 21-year history dating back to when I was just a staffer. But also since then, where he did accept that, he has now recused himself from being the prosecutor for the grand jury when it comes to the jail trust. He's still going to do it for the pardon and parole, but not for the jail trust. So it's less of an issue now, but I still have extended the invitation, and we'll see if he accepts it. But we're friends. It's not an adversarial thing. I just think it would be insightful. You cannot, as I mentioned, you cannot envision these changes without having seen the gravity of them and what the difference that makes. And when I take the inmates out of their cells and interview them and ask them about quality, along with talking with the staff and the clergy and people who go in and out of the building frequently, and they have all told me about how much they have visibly and personally experienced a positive change.
Okay.
Well, we are very grateful for your time. I'm sure we're just scratching the surface, because even after you get the mechanical aspect of it, the facility aspect of it, there's still the sociological aspects of it. We're dealing with medical, mental health. I mean, it's been said, maybe it's just a narrative, but that this is maybe the largest mental health facility in the state of Oklahoma. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just know that there's a lot to unpack on this particular subject, Brian, Commissioner. And
there's no question that it's the largest mental health facility by default, not because we choose to be. And the other thing is that there is all these different things that are being done that are going to take a little bit longer. Keep in mind, the jail trust just took over July 1st of last year, right smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, shutting the whole world down. And you talk about a rough transition. I mean, that was a hard thing they had to, deal with being a hot spot, for instance, right off the bat. So there's other things about moving medical down to the first floor. They're already doing other things to assist in a faster checkpoint so that when we have site visits per cell, they're going to be expedited, and there's going to be more documentation, all of which I point out is connected to transparency. And that's the big buzzword, and we can get trapped into cliches oftentimes, but I really believe that the record of this jail trust and being able to have more information available now to the public than has ever been seen in terms of the operations. And for all the uncomfortable conversations that we have to have, they're at least had. Before, there was never a dialogue. If the sheriff didn't like it, or if it wasn't known, it just didn't exist, and there was no chance to engage in it.
I think it's an interesting study. It's also, when you take Oklahoma County and Tulsa County, you talk about a lot of people in those jails. I mean, there's a lot of coverage of the Department of Corrections, but not so much of these fixes at Oklahoma County. Commissioner Brian Maughan, thanks for everything you do. Thanks for showing up tonight on our debut, and hope this helps get your message out. We want to follow up on this in the near future.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Right. Commissioner Brian Maughan. So Augusta, it's less reported than some of the protests down there, but
you're right.
To start off with, those are the things that people have been talking about for years: is the smelly jail, the water not working, the toilets that won't flush.
Oh yeah, that has to happen. That can't wait 5 years. For a bigger, that's got to happen now.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us, folks, on our debut of News Watch Oklahoma. My co-host is Augusta Mcdonald with News 9. And we're going to move to, and by the way, for those there are Dwight Sublett fans all over the state, and he's coming up here in just a few minutes. And we are going to talk about FDA and those vaccines for kids. But I had an opportunity, and we're going to be putting this up on Mitchell Talks pretty soon. A conversation I had this morning with Congressman Frank Lucas. Now, what got my attention a few weeks ago was his conversation about vaccines, where he was urging Oklahomans to get the vaccines. But also, with things that are being covered in Washington and ably done, the best coverage on this, of course, is AC in DC, Alex Cameron, who's doing these great reports from Washington. It's the only local bureau that's in DC for News 9, News on 6, those great reports. So there's some discussion right now that the Congress, at least the Democrat half of the building, is going to get themselves an agreement coming soon if they can make Senator Manchin happy, which is the first thing. So let me start with, I asked this morning, Augusta, I asked Congressman Lucas, what was happening up there, and let me make sure I've got the right clip here, and I may mess this up, but I think the first clip is, and if it's the wrong clip, I'll start over. But I asked him about how close they are in terms of a deal happening, and he's talking mostly about the Democrats.
First off, I think, Scott, it's worth noting, and let's just discuss this up front. I'm not in.
So that's the wrong clip. Here's the clip I was trying to play.
Right now, we are on the verge of potentially, I think, if things stay on their present course, another dramatic change election-wise next year in 2022. The Dems have put forth their giant package to change America. Bernie Sanders wrote the initial draft in the Senate Budget Committee. Bernie, the socialist who sits as a member of the Democrats, who's the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, $6 trillion. The House realized they couldn't come up with $6 trillion in new spending. By the way, that's real money. So they cut it back to $3.5 trillion. And now over the course of weeks and a couple of months, it's shrunk perhaps to $1.5 trillion. It might be $1 trillion. Speaker Pelosi says every day that just 2 or 3 days from now, we're going to have a draft of the bill. They can't get it pulled together in a country where people want something to happen, not being able to do anything. I may get to be Science Committee chairman in the next term of Congress.
Perfect segue. I want to get into the science committee. You called it your term about the committee. Go ahead and tell our viewers.
It's one of the few fun committees left in the United States Congress. I'm a past chairman of the House Agriculture Committee. I did the 2014 Farm Bill. I've served on financial services for almost my entire tenure, the banks, the credit unions, the cost of capital, that kind of thing. But the Science Committee, that I'm now the lead Republican on, ranking member, would be chairman if we were the majority. That's the fun committee, Scott. We have jurisdictions over the National Science Foundation, all the research money that the public spends on trying to develop new technologies and new breakthroughs, the kind of things that then private industry takes that pure research and turns it into applied and makes our life better. But we're also the National Weather Service. Think of that wonderful facility down in Norman, Oklahoma. Anyone who lives in the Southwest and most assuredly Oklahoma understands how important knowing what the weather's going to be is, because we're Aggies and we're energy producers, critical information. We're also the Department of Defense civilian energy programs. Think about fusion power. Think about cleaner, more efficient natural gas. Think about those kind of things. The civilian side of the Department of Energy. And last but not least, we're NASA, the space programs. And while that might not seem like a natural fit from somebody from Oklahoma, let me tell you, that is the next frontier. And that's one of those places where to keep up with and stay ahead of, more importantly, our competitors on the other side of the Pacific, we have to go back to the moon. We have to go on to Mars. We cannot let a totalitarian society, and I'm not referencing the United States, we cannot let a totalitarian society on the other side of the Pacific that right now is aggressively bullying all their neighbors control the off-world. That cannot be allowed. So I have the fun committee. I have the challenging committee.
So what he's talking about is China. Okay.
Yes.
It's not too
existentially, but yes.
Precisely. Now, I'm going to bring on Dr. Sublett in just a second so we get into the vaccine thing. But for our audience that are in the kind of the same grade temple that I have, when you think about Frank Lucas, I think about Frank Lucas rather. I think about 1993. So he was a backbencher in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma House of Representatives, and a seat opened up, and Frank Lucas decided to run. And we just saw a couple of weeks ago our former assessor, former state representative Leonard Sullivan, who passed away. I remember having a conversation with him, and he said when Frank announced he was going to run in 1993, he said, well, Frank can't win, but I'm going to be for him. Well, in 1993, I guess it was 1994 is when the election was. In this special election, Frank Lucas won against all odds. And that was a precursor. Most historians look back and go, that's the precursor. That was the canary in the coal mine for Democrats. He won that special election over a Democrat. And then in November, there was that Republican revolution. Newt Gingrich and those folks came to power. So he was the bellwether a really long time ago. And now he is the ranking member, which means the highest ranked Republican on that science committee. And they're talking about nuclear power, and they're talking about NASA. So that's a little preview of what he was saying. Hey, in case you weren't catching on to this, sometimes it takes me a while to catch on. What he's saying is still a Democrat deal. And this is what's going to happen. This is Speaker Pelosi's deal. So the reason we asked him on, Augusta, was to talk about vaccines. So let me just bring in a familiar face to our board. And there he is, the Sooners biggest fan, Dr. Dwight Sublett, the president of the Oklahoma chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So I wanted you on and with Augusta on this when I start to play this clip from Congressman Lucas. Now, this program, News Watch Oklahoma, Augusta, is a dovetailing off of Health Watch Oklahoma, which we've been doing for 18, 19 months. He's one of the Fab Four. We often call him Ringo. And so Dr. Sublett is a man, we do not have to look for subtleties with Dr. Sublett. I mean, he's just like right in your face. And we're talking about vaccines. So let me play this clip, if I get this right, Dr. Sublett, of my conversation with Congressman Lucas today about his stance on vaccines. He's going to be referencing mandates, Augusta, right off the bat. So when we come back from this clip, we'll discuss what he has to say. So here's Congressman Frank Lucas this morning in a conversation we recorded.
First off, I think, Scott, it's worth noting, and let's just discuss this up front. I'm not in favor of mandatory vaccines. I don't believe the government should have the authority to force anyone to be vaccinated. Vaccines are one of those things, whether it's COVID-19 or everything from polio to rubella, measles, mumps, even the shot that your doctor or nurse gives you when you have to have stitches to make sure you don't have tetanus. Remember old lockjaw, the phrase they used in the old days? Vaccines are a critically important part of our life. So I'm not mandatory. I think we should all think it through, rationally make the right decision. In my point of view, the right decision is being vaccinated. Whatever it is, why have the disease when you can take a vaccine and not get sick? Now, some will say the vaccines are not perfect. Well, no vaccine's perfect. I haven't found anything yet in the world that is perfect, but they provide an amazing level of protection. Now, that said, where are we at? When President Trump was in office and the COVID-19 scourge came at us, I suspect from the other side of the Pacific, but ultimately that will be figured out. When it came at us, we had to have a response. As a kid, I listened to my grandparents and great aunts and uncles talk about the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 and 1919, how it literally brought life in Roger Mills County, Oklahoma, to a stop for a month, 2 months, and how it killed young, healthy men and women, and how it absolutely slaughtered pregnant women and little kids. I mean, their stories were almost outlandish as a kid. Now, fast forward a century ahead. When COVID-19, the scourge rolled in, we were seeing those kind of infection rates. It was spreading rapidly. President Trump, give the man credit, stepped up and made the initial push to spend the resources to develop a vaccine. And we started down the process of maybe as many as 20 or 25 different vaccines. We wound up with 3 very effective vaccines now. He also is the person who pushed to spend the money by the federal government to build the factories in a hurry to mass produce the vaccine. He was the one who was supportive of making the vaccine free and available to everyone in the United States. So this is a Trump vaccine, first and foremost. That said, it is proven to be impressively effective. I've been fully vaccinated with Pfizer. My wife has been fully vaccinated with Moderna. I have staffers who've had the Johnson & Johnson. If you look at where we are now in Oklahoma, Scott, the good news, of course, is 58% of eligible Oklahomans are now fully vaccinated. Thank goodness. But there's some bad news too, Scott. According to the State Department of Health, for every 10 people who are hospitalized with COVID-19, every 10, 8 of them were never vaccinated. 8 of them. That could be dramatically reduced. And if you look at the federal numbers nationwide, 25% of the intensive care unit beds, that's where we provide maximum health care. You are super sick when you go to the ICUs. 25% of the ICU beds in this country are occupied by COVID-19 patients. And if that's not enough, you look at the state CDC numbers for Oklahoma, over 10,000 of our fellow citizens have died from COVID-19 in this pandemic. We're past 600,000 Americans who've died, and 500,000 of those died before we had a vaccine. So the vaccines are critically important. They've been developed in the most public sort of ways. Even President Trump has had the vaccines. I've had them, but I'm not a person who says you have to be vaccinated. People need to take those smartphones and look it up. Do their research, Scott. I interact with the public in a very cautious fashion now for the last year and a half with COVID issues. But the comments I get from people that vaccines will melt your DNA, they're full of chips to track you, it'll make you docile, it'll cause you to stick to the refrigerator door when you walk by. I mean, Scott, good grief.
You know, I think his comments just indicate how we have a little bit of short-term memory when it comes to the way that the development of the vaccine and the way that healthcare policy has been politicized regarding the vaccine. Just the way that that rhetoric has kind of shifted in the past 20 months. I mean, if more of our leaders initially and throughout the pandemic had, you know, and of course, there were questions, and as it was being developed, you know, that there was different sorts of information coming from public health bodies. But if that strong validation of science and research in the vaccine would have always come, I think Oklahoma would be in a different place right now in terms of its death numbers.
Right. Well, I listening to what Representative Lucas said, I would be in total agreement with what he said. Mandates really do not work, and particularly when we're talking about now vaccinating children ages 5 through 11. It is important to get the right information, and certainly there's a lot of information out there that's very bogus, and you really have to sift through it. We are talking to families here in Oklahoma and also nationwide. Get with your doctor or your healthcare provider, the person that you trust, the person you take your child to when they're sick or for well child visits or other vaccines and that sort of thing. And you know that you're going to get straight answers from, and get the right information. And it's really good to see that we are at a point that we can reach out to this age group. In America, that's 28 million individuals. And of that 28 million individuals, 1.9 million 5 to 11-year-olds have had the disease documented, at least, and I'm sure there's more than that. 8,300 hospitalizations, and there's been, I think, 94 deaths total, which puts it in the top 10 category for number of deaths in that age group. That seems like a small number, but that age group is the small, in that period of time, that's the least amount that fatalities seen in the 5 to 11 age group. But anyway, the point that to be made is the Food and Drug Administration board met yesterday. They evaluated throughout the day and decided that the risk of the benefits of the vaccine far outweigh the risk of the vaccine. It has been studied. We had the luxury in this case of having studies done on individuals from age 12 up and seeing the results of that, and also millions of people have received the vaccine now. Now, is it going to be different in children? Possibly, but so far that's not being seen. The data that I have is we had around 2,300 children looked at as far as testing. In that testing, no severe side effects at all were seen. None of the multi-system inflammatory disease, no myocarditis, inflammation of the heart. Mainly, it was just local reaction at the site, headache, fatigue, that sort of thing. The children seem to tolerate it well, and they have done well as far as mounting an antibody response. The antibody response that we have seen in this age group is very close to what we've been seeing in the adolescent age group that came on before them. So that's good news. And in Oklahoma, that's about 230,000 individuals that could get the vaccine in that age group. So I'm excited about it. I think that it will be a big boost in helping to combat the disease. Probably the most important thing in terms of children has been the problem of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, because of the change in routine, being in and out of school. That's created numerous challenges for our educational, our schools, our educational systems. There's numerous challenges for our parents in making arrangements to have them taken care of, providing education at home when we were under virtual, that sort of thing. So it's another step forward toward getting back to a normal routine and being reassured that not only is my child protected, but I'm also going to provide protection to maybe the child next to me that has an underlying disease that compromises their immune system, or being around grandma who is more vulnerable to the disease, things of this nature. So there's reassurance to be had there. But the big thing that I would want to emphasize is for parents to be comfortable with it and get with the person you trust, your provider, and sit down and say, is this what I need to do? I think the answer is going to be yes, but you need to know why it is, okay? And you need to spend a little time with them. And I think that's the place to optimally getting the vaccine in the office, or if that's not possible, going to a pharmacy or to a health clinic, like a health department, that sort of thing. That is the way to go. But the best way to go would be through the doctor's office. So,
do you think this will be a turning point in some of the trends that we've seen in kids' mental health? So much depression, anxiety due to isolation and changing routines. And I was interviewing an educator last week who does kind of like career support with high school students, and he was like, I've never seen kids this young have to worry at such a wide scale about, taking home a disease that could kill grandma, or, they've just had to grapple with adult concerns before they're ready to. And I guess, do you think that this will be a turning point in kind of slowing down how quickly some kids have had to grow up throughout the pandemic?
Well, it's certainly going to help things. Pre-COVID, we were already having problems with depression and other anxiety disorders, things like that. There's a lot of stress in life in general in 2021 or at this present time. And we were dealing with that anyway. A lot of behavioral issues, a lot of social issues, family issues, you can go on and on, that have caused difficulties for kids. COVID certainly has aggravated that significantly. So in answer to your question, yes, I think if we get vaccines are successful in vaccinating a good portion of our kids in this age group, that will provide some reassurance, not only to the parents, but also to the children. Hey, we're protecting you against it. Is it an absolute, like Representative Lucas said? There's no absolutes in anything. Is it a perfect thing? No, but it's certainly a lot better than what we've had up to this point. I feel very comfortable with it. I feel like that we've got a good vaccine. I think the work's been done. This goes through a 4-step process. I want to mention that the FDA panel met yesterday, approved it. The commissioner of the FDA has to sign off on it. Then it goes to the Committee of Immunization Practices with the CDC, and that's going to be on November 2nd and 3rd. And they will come up with the protocol, the final protocol as far as when to administer it, dosage. It looks like the dosage would be about a third of the adult dose. And for that whole age group, aged 5 through 11, would be about a third, 10 micrograms. Adults get 30 micrograms. And as far as when to take the second dose and that sort of thing. And then it's finally signed off by the CDC director. So it's a 4-step process before it goes. But I think that will be done right along, so that maybe as early as the end of next week, they'll start administering vaccines to kids. But it is something that I really encourage parents to look into and take advantage of. It's just one more step forward to where we can get more back into our normal routine, having kids in school, being able to go to events that we want to go to and not have to worry about it near as much, that sort of thing, parents at work, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I primarily cover education, and it's certainly been a concern and a question in schools. How do we protect this population? Because it's only masks and quarantine have been the only kind of mitigation policies. So this is hopefully a game changer.
I think it will be. I really do.
And again, you've kind of talked about, parents need to be okay with this. I guess, what are some questions that parents can ask their provider if they've got a 10-year-old and they're interested?
Well, I think the questions you're going to want to ask is first about safety, and just what we just discussed here. The safety has across the board in the studies that have already been done from age 12 on up has been remarkably good. And that seems to be borne out in the younger children. And I that doesn't surprise me at all. Children tend to tolerate vaccines and this sort of thing much better than adults do. And I think that'll be the case with this. I really do. How effective it is. Right now, they're quoting a figure of around 91% effectiveness. That's almost unheard of. In vaccines, and particularly like, for example, the flu vaccine, you don't see that. It's effective, it's safe, but also they just need to be aware of, can I get a hold of you if I have a question afterwards? If I'm seeing a symptom, how do I get in touch with you? What will be the mechanism there? That sort of thing. And as far as booster doses, that's not going to be known for right now. As far as how that's going to work out for kids, we just don't know. But that's some of the stuff that I would be asking about. And the thing is that it's I feel like the right thing to do. I always have put in terms of, is this something that I would recommend for my own child or grandchild or whatever? And the answer is yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that if I can't answer in that fashion, then I'm not going to recommend it. And I think most of my colleagues would be in the same boat on this. I think that we're been ready for this, and it's exciting that it is here.
Do you think we're turning the corner, Dr. Sublett?
Scott, I don't know. We've been, as you know, we've been on this merry-go-round for 18 months. And, last spring we thought, oh boy, we're going to get to go move over to other topics besides COVID. And then here comes Delta, so I don't know. The thing is, if we can get the number of what they've called the viral load down, the amount of virus in the population down, more herd immunity, you hear these terms, then there's less likelihood that we're going to have a mutation to another variant, that it gets less and less likely. That's the usual thing with that. COVID's been a real challenge because it's thrown a lot of curveballs along the way. And my hope is that it will, that we are turning the corner. I hope we do.
Well, we always appreciate you. You're not going to play hooky Monday night again, are you?
Oh, I don't know. I might show up. I guess I will.
Dr. Dwight Sublett is the one of the original Fab Four.
One of the originals.
Okay.
And he is the president of the Oklahoma chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, which means kid docs.
The kid doc.
Yes. There you go.
I've used extensively over the years. And so, by the way, when do you think pediatricians will have that 5 to 11 shot ready to go?
They are already shipping that out to the offices, and they're prioritizing the pediatric and family practice offices that take care of kids. They're the rural health clinics, federal health clinics, and pharmacies. Those are the priority 4 areas that process has already started, the shipping it out in anticipation that it will slide on through the approval process. So I'm hopeful. I can't know for sure exactly when it'll arrive here in the offices here in Oklahoma, but I'm hoping that by the end of next week, if that's when they say go with it, we'll have the vaccine there. If not, it should be there very soon after that. So,
all right.
Yeah.
I've done one quick thing.
Sure.
So there's a kind of a subpopulation of kids with disabilities who have been kind of affected a little bit more than maybe your typical kid, because there's health risks of being in school. For parents of kids with disabilities in that age range, what's their question with this vaccine, and will it allow their kid better access to an education now?
Well, sure. That has been an issue, as far as social distancing, masking, and everything for children who have conditions, for example, autistic children, children with developmental delays, that sort of thing. That's been a real challenge to be able to carry that out effectively in that age group. And it's in doing virtual learning with some of those children, big challenge, hard to do. So I think that it's going to be a big benefit for all children, but particularly that group. I think that they're going to be able to be in classroom. Parents are going to feel much better about it with the protection that they're getting. And so that's a big step forward. Yes.
Okay.
Doc, it's always good to see you.
Good to see you, Scott. Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you. Thank you for being here.
You bet.
And we'll see you, Dr. Sublett, Monday night.
All right. Sounds good.
Got a date.
All right.
Bye.
All right. So I think that is wrapping up our hour. First of all, thank you, folks, that have tuned in. We didn't do much preview about this. So number one, I want to thank Augusta Mcdonald for coming on with us and adding to this program. And I think, Augusta, as we move into this coming year, we have a little thing called the governor's race that's going to be, if education is not the biggest topic in the governor's race, I don't know what it would be.
I think you're right about that.
You cover it every day. You cover education every day. So you think that the politics and the education will be meeting together on this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's an interesting time for, if education is, as a broad topic, is going to enter the political sphere in such a big way with the superintendent of public instruction running for governor. I hope that the community takes this as an opportunity to, really invest some time in taking a hard look at education in the state and policies and where our districts are lacking and what we can do to invest in students and move them forward after a very difficult couple of years. So I think any time that, kind of a broad topic like this gets a little extra attention, I think it can be a really good thing.
I would have to say, I wanted to do this right up front for people that have tuned in and you have not been at News 9 long. Give us a little background on how Augusta Mcdonald came to be at News 9.
Sure. So I most recently, so I'm from Montana, born and raised. My education was pretty mixed. I was pretty indecisive in my undergrad. So I did a couple of years of theology and Middle Eastern civilization study in Southern California. And then I finished a journalism degree at the University of Montana. I worked at the local CBS affiliate there for 3 years. And then I worked in Spokane, Washington a little bit as an anchor reporter. And then I decided to take a break from the business for a little bit. I managed a food and beverage business, and I tried marketing, and I tried a couple different things, and have really come back into news. My husband was stationed in Southern California most recently. He was in the Marine Corps. He just got out, and so we came out to Oklahoma, and I got to get back into the industry as an anchor reporter with News 9. And I just have to say, Oklahoma City is just the coolest community, and really enjoying covering education. This is such an interesting moment for education policy in the U.S., and I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Well, wonderful. And we're so happy that you could join us. I hope they'll do it again.
Absolutely. I'd love to. This is great.
I hope Ryan Welton will let us do it again.
Me too.
When we're giving shout outs, I tell people the guy behind the curtain who makes all of this happen is the digital director for Griffin Companies, Ryan Welton, who works both at News 9, News on 6, and sometimes I think he might be a bot himself. He is so brilliant. And
he is. He gets the algorithm thing.
He does get that.
Is beyond me.
All right. By the way, if you haven't seen 60 Minutes this last week, did you get to see the Michael Keaton story about his ranch in Montana and the things that he's doing right now?
Oh my gosh. I don't even want to know about all the out-of-state people who have a ranch in Montana now. It hurts my heart.
It's
not going to lie.
My favorite thing was when he's reprising the Batman role. That's 40 years later. So he was asked, are you going to use the Batman suit from the 90s? Maybe it's 30 years. Anyway, the whole point of it was he tried it back on and it still fits. So I really dislike him. That's
40 years later, good for him. Yeah, that must have taken a little work.
All right. That is our debut of News Watch Oklahoma. I want to thank all the folks at News 9, News on 6, Ryan Welton, all of our guests. This is a beta, and we are trying to see if people are interested in a little deeper dive into the news. And I think, Augusta, your participation and contribution is invaluable. And thank you so much for bringing your perspective to this. We appreciate you and hope you'll do it again with us really soon.
Oh, you're so kind, Scott. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great show.
Thank you. And thanks to our viewers on News 9, News on 6, on Mitchell Talks, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. We thank you, and reminding you, we'll see you Monday night on Health Watch Oklahoma when we talk about other things. Hopefully, we're going to start talking more about COVID. Dr. Sublett mentioned that. At one time, we were talking about other things, other health challenges in Oklahoma besides COVID.
Yeah.
And then Delta came along. So
yeah.
Hopefully we'll get back into we have other challenges in Oklahoma besides COVID, but that has been the one on the front pages.
Wouldn't it be nice to move on to those?
It would. All right. To all of you who've made this possible this evening, to all of you who've watched,